Well, I'm using Sound Recorder. It's a free program off the internet. And I'm using E-Sword. It's a free download. You can download it yourself off the internet. It has a lot of great tools. I'll make a video later on that. But when I was reading this, all these words are highlighted. These are keywords that are related. Keywords are words that are either the same, similar, or related. Wife is related to children, and we see that pregnant, and these are time words in the blue now 10 years later. And once you spend the time to highlight these words, it really brings out a lot of details in scripture you never saw before. Here we have a time word, thereafter, and this is where I want to focus on verse 13 here in Genesis 16. Thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. Now, I forgot to highlight this word name here, because name is really the center of the study. And this is what I saw. So Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord. She renamed God who had spoken to her. She said, "You are the God who sees me." She also said, "Have I truly seen the one who sees me?" Now, when you highlight these words, you notice there's 4 words here: refer, spoken, said, and said is repeated to refer to speaking. And there's also 3 words: sees, seen, and sees is repeated here too. So when you see 3 or more words in the same sentence that are related, you know it's an important sentence, important part of Scripture. And we can go ahead and guess at, oh, okay, Hagar and what she means. So that well was named whatever, which means well of the living, one who sees me. It can be found between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave Abraham a son, and Abraham named Ishmael. Abraham was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. So we see the word named. Name is repeated here too. So this is the end of one chapter, and once we get into another chapter, we see something strange. What's more, I am changing your name. It will no longer be Abram. Instead, you will be called Abraham, for you will be the father of many nations. So we see God changing Abram's name. Before, in the previous chapter, we saw Hagar changing God's name. Isn't that unusual? This gets even stranger, because when we get down here, then the Lord said to Abraham regarding Sarai, your wife, her name will no longer be Sarai. From now on, her name will be Sarah. So here we see God changed Abraham's name. God changed Sarah's name. In the previous chapter, we see Hagar changing God's name. Isn't that unusual? So when we look at these key words, we can start looking for these little groups. We see here covenant, guarantee, covenant, God said. So we hear this conversation. And what God is doing is he's repeating this, confirming a covenant. I will confirm my covenant with you and your descendants after you, from generation to generation. This is the everlasting covenant. I will always be your God and the God of your descendants after you. And I will give the entire land of Canaan, where you now live as a foreigner, to you and your descendants. It will be their possession forever. And I will be their God. You see, there's all of these timing words: everlasting, always. And then I noticed I missed a couple of them here. After. Descendants after you. So this is the beginning of a new story. Then the Lord said to Abraham, your responsibility is to obey the terms of the covenant, you and your descendants, and have this continual responsibility. This is the covenant that you and your descendants must keep. Each male I used the wrong color for that. Among you must be circumcised. You must cut off the flesh of your foreskin as a sign of the covenant between me and you. From generation to generation, every male child must be circumcised on the 8th day after his birth. You see, when we start talking about prophetic scripture, there's always this congregation, a collection of time elements in it. And we see a lot of time elements in here. We see, obviously, descendants, generation to generation, family, male, they all seem to have a great amount of bearing with this covenant. And there's another word here that I kind of noticed. From generation to generation, every child must be circumcised from the 8th day of his birth. This applies not only to members of your family, but also to servants born in your household and the foreigners' servants whom you have purchased. See, he repeats the word servants here again. And remember in the previous chapter, we were talking about the word servant with Hagar. And he brings up this word purchased. And this word purchase isn't used too much in here. Yes, I will bless her richly. It's talking about Sarah here. And he also repeats this again down here at the very end. Both Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised that same day, along with the other men and boys of the household, whether they were born here or bought as servants. All were circumcised. See this word servants again and this word bought. What does that remind you of? Purchased. See how this is actually pointing ahead? Servants were purchased. It's pointing ahead to Christ. So we know this promised land that God is making a covenant with the physical promised land with Abraham. But then we know there's a physical one. Then Abraham bowed down to the ground, but he laughed to himself in disbelief. How could I become a father at the age of 100, he thought, and how can Sarah have a baby when she is 90 years old? So Abraham said to God, may Ishmael live under your special blessing? Now we begin to see why would Abraham, talking to God, ask God, hey, can you change your plan? But God replied, no, Sarah, your wife, will give birth to a son for you. You will name. Oh, see, I missed this one too. There's another point that I should have caught before. You will name him Isaac, and I will confirm my covenant with him and his descendants in an everlasting covenant. You see, you keep on repeating this relationship, and you keep on repeating this time, and you keep on repeating this conversation. Now Sarah, or Hagar before, repeats this word see and seen, but also this word conversation. But even though she's having a conversation, we got to remember she's having a conversation with an angel. And I thought this is pretty unusual. If God is talking directly with Abraham, but sends an angel to Hagar. And this angel is kind of like a title. And here's another title right in the middle. And the angel said to her, Hagar, Sarah's servant, see, we're reminded again, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress. Here's another title, Sarah. See, right in between this angel, 4 times, he used this title, mistress. Does that get you kind of thinking? We only got a couple more minutes here, but here we see in this green, these are movement words and movement in relationship, in regards to a relationship. And typically, responsibility I wouldn't have highlighted, but when you start talking about each male among you, that's a relationship, movement relationship, covenant between. Among Ishmael live under your special blessing. He's asking Ishmael to live under, not among. Now here, this has to do your responsibility. That has to do with relationship. Our relationship with God is a responsibility. And this is really strange. We're talking about movement. Is God finished speaking and he left Abraham? Could God really leave? On the very next day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and every male in the household, including those born there and those who he had bought. Then he circumcised, cutting off their foreskins, just as God told him. See how God immediately obeyed? And there's a lot of strange things in here. Both Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised that same day. Abraham didn't wait around. Abraham obeyed immediately, along with the other men and boys of the household, whether they were born there or bought as servants. This is just kind of strange on how they emphasize and repeat the word servants and tie this in with Hagar. But did you notice the circumcision, the sign, and everything? Now there's 2 different signs here. You can either try changing God's name. Try changing the way God intends to relate to us by speaking, you emphasize it by speaking directly to Abraham, having a conversation with him. Or you can just say, hey, I see God. God spoke through an angel, but, God was with Hagar. God saved Hagar in the desert. There's just a few things that we need to consider here when we're looking at this scripture, and I don't have all the answers because it's the next story. We'll add a little bit more when the Lord appeared again to Abraham. So take a deeper look at this stuff, and hopefully you learned a few little things about Bible study and are able to put a couple of these things together. Now here's one I will return you about this time next year. See how God can see the future? He can see the future, but just some things to consider. So I hope you have fun with it. Download E-Sword. Download the King James Plus. This will give you connections to all of the words in the concordance, and have a good time studying. Don't forget to study with God's Spirit. And like the story said, you got to learn to listen, have that conversation with God. If you look at verse 15, it explains a lot, or chapter 15 explains a lot. With spoke to Abraham, he said to Abraham, but Abraham replied, hey, he's having a conversation with God. So, have your conversation with God and see what he shows you in this